The first thing my brother-in-law did after becoming CEO was throw my employee badge into the trash. It landed on top of someone's half-eaten sandwich. The entire executive floor burst into laughter. He leaned back against the conference table, straightened the $1,000 tie he had spent the whole morning showing off, and smiled as if he'd just delivered the cleverest joke of his career. "There," he said loudly. "Now everyone knows where she belongs." A few people chuckled because they wanted to. Most laughed because they were afraid not to. I looked at the badge lying inside the trash can. My name, Evelyn Carter. 22 years with the company. Vice President of Operations. Gone with one flick of his wrist. "Pick it up," he said. His voice wasn't angry. That made it worse. It carried the calm confidence of a man who believed nobody in the room would ever challenge him. I said, "Pick it up." The conference room fell completely silent. 47 executives. 3 board members, 2 corporate attorneys. Nobody moved, not even my husband. Daniel stood near the windows with both hands buried in his pockets. He stared at the city skyline, as though what was happening had nothing to do with him. That hurt more than the badge. Because Daniel wasn't just my husband, he was Ethan's older brother. And today, he chose silence. I didn't bend down. I didn't argue. I simply looked at Ethan. He had changed. 5 years ago, he was the ambitious kid who asked me for advice before every presentation. Now he wore success like a costume 2 sizes too big. Expensive watch, designer shoes, perfect haircut, an ego that entered every room 5 minutes before he did. He mistook authority for importance. "What's wrong?" he asked, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Too proud?" "I thought operations people were supposed to follow instructions." More laughter. Someone nervously cleared their throat. Across the room, the new HR director looked away. She'd only worked here for 3 weeks. She already understood exactly how this place operated. Whoever held power controlled the truth. I finally spoke. My voice stayed perfectly even. "If humiliating employees is your first decision as CEO, I hope the second one is better." A few faces froze. Ethan laughed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. This is just a little fun." He walked closer until we stood less than 2 feet apart. "You've been acting like you own this company for years." His smile widened. "I just wanted everyone to remember. Who actually signs the paychecks now?" He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out an envelope, and dropped it onto the conference table. My name was printed across the front. Termination notice. Effective immediately. No warning, no investigation, no explanation. Just one signature. His. He folded his arms. "Security will escort you out." Still, I didn't touch the envelope, didn't raise my voice, didn't defend myself. I simply asked one question. "Has the board approved this?" His grin faltered, only for a fraction of a second. Then it returned. "I am the CEO. I don't need permission." That answer told me everything I needed to know. 3 weeks earlier, the board of directors had quietly authorized a confidential governance review after receiving multiple complaints about unusual executive decisions. Only 4 people knew the investigation existed: the chairman, outside counsel, the lead investigator, and me. Not because I reported to Ethan, because I had spent 22 years building the operational systems that every audit depended on. For 21 days, I watched Ethan approve contracts without reading them, sign vendor agreements his legal team had warned him about, promote college friends into senior leadership positions, ignore every safeguard that had protected this company for decades. He believed he was building an empire. In reality, he had been creating evidence. He just didn't know it yet. Back in the conference room, the silence stretched. Ethan pointed toward the door. "You're still here." "I thought I fired you." I smiled, not because anything about the morning was funny, because after 22 years in corporate leadership, I'd learned something most executives never do. The loudest person in the room is usually the least prepared. And for the first time that morning, I realized Ethan had just made a mistake he could never take back. Nobody laughed this time. The room had changed, not because anyone suddenly respected me, because uncertainty had entered the room. Executives could tolerate cruelty. They hated uncertainty. Ethan noticed it immediately. He swept his eyes across the conference table. "Why is everyone just sitting there?" No one answered. He pointed toward the security supervisor standing beside the door. "Mark, escort her out." Mark shifted his weight but didn't move. His badge had my signature on the authorization line. I'd approved his promotion 8 years earlier after he pulled 2 employees out of a warehouse fire. He wasn't afraid of Ethan. He was confused. "Sir," he said carefully, "Mrs. Carter still has unrestricted executive clearance. So revoke it. IT hasn't received authorization. I am the authorization." The company's chief information officer slowly closed his laptop. "Actually, executive credentials require 2 approvals." Ethan frowned. "Since when?" "Since the governance reforms after the Mason lawsuit." "I signed those reforms." "No." The CIO looked directly at him. "Mrs. Carter did." Several heads turned toward me. For years, everyone assumed operations simply handled schedules, warehouses, and budgets. Very few people understood that operations also designed the internal controls governing nearly every executive action inside the company. The rules Ethan believed were slowing him down had been written by me. He laughed, a little louder than necessary. "Fine. We'll deactivate it later." He grabbed the termination letter and pushed it toward me. "You're fired either way." Again, I didn't touch it. Instead, I looked at the chairman's empty seat. Richard Holloway. I should have been here. He never missed quarterly executive meetings. Never. "Where's Mr. Holloway?" I asked. Ethan shrugged. "He had more important things to do." I canceled his attendance. That caught my attention. "You canceled the chairman?" "I'm the CEO. I run executive meetings now." He smiled proudly. "As far as this company is concerned, he answers to me." Across the table, outside counsel quietly removed his glasses. He didn't interrupt. He simply rubbed the bridge of his nose, the way attorneys do when they realize a client has just said something catastrophically stupid. My phone vibrated once. Only once. No ringtone, no notification sound. Just one vibration. Most people would have ignored it. I didn't. I glanced down. One message. "Unknown number. Hold your position. Do not leave the building." Nothing else. No signature, no explanation. I deleted the message without changing my expression. Ethan noticed. Personal texts? Already looking for another job? No. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I was just reminded to be patient. He smirked. You'll have plenty of time for patience, especially after payroll cuts you off. Daniel finally spoke. It was the first sentence he'd said all morning. Ethan, maybe we should discuss this privately. My husband avoided looking at me. He was speaking only to his brother. Ethan waved him off. No. I've spent years listening to everyone tell me how brilliant Evelyn is. The genius, the fixer, the woman who keeps this place running. He pointed toward me again. Let's see how brilliant she is without a company behind her. The words weren't really meant for me. They were meant for everyone else. A declaration, a coronation. The new king eliminating the old guard. The conference room doors opened. A young administrative assistant hurried inside. She looked pale. Sir, she swallowed. There are people here asking for Mrs. Carter. Ethan rolled his eyes. Tell them she's unavailable. They said, they're not here to see you. Silence. They specifically requested Mrs. Carter. Ethan's smile disappeared. Who? She looked down at the visitor log in her hands. There are 4 of them. They're from Henderson and Price. Outside counsel's head snapped up. For the first time all morning, he looked genuinely alarmed. Henderson and Price wasn't just another law firm. It was the independent legal team hired directly by the board of directors. They never visited headquarters without advance notice. Never. Ethan looked around the room, trying to understand why several executives suddenly looked uncomfortable. What do they want? The assistant answered quietly. They said they're here regarding the board's confidential investigation. The room went completely still. Ethan laughed. Investigation? What investigation? No one answered. Not because they didn't know. Because no one wanted to be the first person to tell the CEO that everyone else in the room suddenly understood something he didn't. The meeting he thought he controlled had never really been his, and somewhere downstairs, 4 attorneys were already waiting. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the air inside the conference room felt heavier. Ethan looked from one face to another, waiting for someone to laugh. Nobody did. He turned back toward the assistant. Send them away. They don't have an appointment. The assistant swallowed. They said, the board doesn't need appointments. Outside counsel quietly closed the legal folder in front of him. Ethan, I think you should let them in. The CEO's jaw tightened. I didn't ask for your opinion. No, you didn't. The attorney folded his hands. But if Henderson and Price is here, they're not working for you. 3 slow knocks echoed through the glass doors. Nobody answered. The doors opened anyway. 4 people entered. 3 attorneys. 1 elderly man in a charcoal suit carrying nothing except a thin black leather folder. Every executive in the room recognized him instantly. Richard Holloway, chairman of the board. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He simply looked tired. Very tired. He stopped at the head of the conference table. The seat Ethan had proudly declared belonged to him. Richard looked at it for several seconds, then at Ethan. Interesting. His voice remained calm. I don't remember resigning. A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere near the back of the room. It died immediately. Ethan recovered quickly. Richard, I was just keeping the meeting moving. You weren't here. I canceled your attendance. The chairman blinked once. You canceled mine? That's right. I'm running this company now. Richard slowly nodded. I see. He placed the leather folder on the table. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just gently. As chairman, I'd like to begin today's meeting. Ethan crossed his arms. This meeting already started. No, Richard answered. It didn't. He looked toward the corporate secretary. Has attendance been recorded? The secretary shook her head. No, sir. Has the agenda been approved? No. Has the board been called to order? No. Richard looked back at Ethan. Then no official meeting has taken place. The confidence Ethan had worn all morning slipped just enough for everyone to notice. He hid it behind a smirk. This is ridiculous. I'm the CEO. I don't answer to procedural games. Richard didn't respond. Instead, he looked toward me. Ms. Carter. I stood. For the record, have you accepted the termination notice presented this morning? I have not. Have you signed anything? No. Have you surrendered your executive credentials? No. Have you left company property? No. He nodded once. Then, as of this moment, you remain Vice President of Operations. The room erupted into whispers. Ethan slammed both palms onto the conference table. This is unbelievable. I fired her. Richard looked at him with genuine curiosity. Did you? Yes. Based on what cause? I don't need cause. I'm the CEO. One of the attorneys quietly opened the binder. You do. She spoke without emotion. Section 8.4 of your Executive Employment Agreement. She slid a document across the table. It requires board review before terminating any elected corporate officer. Ethan didn't touch it. I never read that. We know, the attorney replied. You signed it anyway. Someone coughed to hide a laugh. Ethan heard it. His face reddened. He looked around the room searching for support. No one met his eyes. Not even Daniel. My husband sat frozen in his chair. His hands were clasped together so tightly, his knuckles had turned white. For months, he'd watched Ethan ignore advice, ignore warnings, ignore governance. He'd convinced himself everything would somehow work out. Now, the consequences were walking through the front door. Richard finally looked at me again. Evelyn. I apologize. You should never have been placed in this position. It won't happen again. I nodded politely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ethan laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. So that's it? Everyone suddenly chooses her side? Richard answered immediately. No. We're choosing the company's side. Silence. Then the chairman opened the black leather folder. Inside were only 3 documents. 1 resolution, 1 investigation order, 1 suspension notice. He placed them neatly on the table. Ethan Carter. As chairman of the board, I am placing you on immediate administrative leave, pending completion of the board's investigation. The color drained from Ethan's face. What? You can't do that. I built this company. Richard held his gaze. No. You inherited it. And today, we're going to find out what you've done with it. The room became so quiet. Everyone could hear the elevator doors opening somewhere down the hallway. The elevator doors opened. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble hallway. Not security, not executives. 8 people. 4 from corporate compliance, 2 forensic accountants, 2 IT specialists carrying locked evidence cases. Every one of them wore the same dark navy identification badge. Nobody spoke as they entered. Richard simply nodded toward the head of the team. Mr. Lawson, you may begin. The lead investigator opened a leather portfolio. He didn't look at Ethan. He looked at everyone else. For the record, my name is David Lawson. I've been retained by the board of directors to conduct an independent investigation into possible violations of fiduciary duty, procurement policy, financial reporting standards, and executive ethics. He paused. We've been working for 23 days. The room collectively inhaled. 23 days. This wasn't a surprise inspection. This had been planned. Ethan forced a laugh. So you've been spying on me? No, Lawson replied. We've been collecting evidence. There's a difference. He placed several sealed envelopes on the conference table. Each carried the name of an executive. No one reached for theirs. You are not under accusation. Lawson continued. These contain legal preservation notices. Effective immediately. All emails, text messages, handwritten notes, expense reports, contracts, and electronic devices related to executive business are subject to litigation hold. One executive quietly whispered, "Oh, God." Ethan straightened his jacket. This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and seize company property, one of the IT specialists calmly answered. We're not seizing company property. We're preserving evidence. There's an important legal distinction. Lawson turned another page. Our first request concerns procurement approvals signed during the past 6 months. He looked directly at Ethan. We're specifically interested in executive authorizations exceeding $20 million. Ethan smiled again. I signed dozens. I'm the CEO. I approve major contracts. Lawson nodded. Yes, you certainly did. He slid a spreadsheet across the table. 37 transactions, each highlighted in yellow. Across from everyone was the same approving signature. Ethan Carter. The chief financial officer slowly adjusted his glasses. I never received copies of some of these. Lawson looked at him. You weren't supposed to. The approvals bypassed finance. Silence. The CFO turned toward Ethan. You told me the board had already cleared these. Ethan didn't answer. Richard folded his hands. Ethan, I'll ask you once. Did the board authorize these contracts? No. Did legal? No. Did finance? No. Then who approved them? Ethan hesitated, only for a second. I did. Nobody in the room reacted. Not because they weren't shocked, because every person present suddenly understood the investigation was much larger than anyone had imagined. Lawson reached into his portfolio again. This is where Mrs. Carter becomes relevant. Every eye turned toward me. He continued. 3 weeks ago, Vice President Carter noticed irregular vendor routing during a routine operational audit. Irregular? Ethan interrupted. She was spying on me. Lawson ignored him. Rather than confronting anyone, she followed company policy. She documented every discrepancy. She secured the records. She informed the chairman. And she continued performing her normal duties without alerting anyone under review. Richard looked at me. Exactly as instructed. I simply nodded. One of the younger executives looked stunned. You knew? For weeks? I knew enough to protect the company's records. Nothing more, nothing less. Daniel finally lifted his eyes toward me. For the first time all morning, our eyes met. His face carried something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, regret. He understood now. Every late night, every canceled dinner, every weekend I'd spent reviewing operational reports. He'd assumed I was obsessed with work. The truth was, I'd been trying to keep the company his father built from collapsing. Ethan slammed his fist against the table. This is a setup. She's been trying to destroy me. No, Richard answered quietly. She was trying to protect us. You confused accountability with betrayal. The room fell silent again. Then Lawson spoke the sentence no CEO ever wants to hear. We're only discussing procurement this morning. He closed the spreadsheet. The financial investigation starts after lunch. Several executives exchanged nervous glances. Procurement alone had already filled an entire binder. How much evidence was waiting in the afternoon session? Lawson looked directly at Ethan one last time. If I were you, I would contact personal legal counsel. Because by the end of today, this will no longer be just a board matter. No one stood. No one reached for the coffee that had been served 20 minutes earlier. The expensive conference room suddenly felt smaller. Lawson looked around the table. I'd like to begin with something simple. He nodded toward one of the investigators. A large monitor at the end of the room came to life. The company logo disappeared. A spreadsheet replaced it. Rows. Columns. Vendor names. Approval dates. Payment amounts. Nothing looked unusual. Until Lawson highlighted one line. Northbridge Consulting approved. $18.7 million. Then another. Northbridge Consulting approved. $22.4 million. Then another. And another. 7 contracts. 1 vendor. Nearly $100 million. The chief financial officer frowned. I've never heard of Northbridge. The procurement director slowly shook her head. Neither have I. Lawson clicked once. The company registration appeared. Founded 8 months ago. Employees 3. Office address, a small rented suite above a dry cleaning business. The room grew noticeably quieter. Lawson turned toward Ethan. Can you explain why a 3-person consulting company received $98 million in contracts? Ethan didn't hesitate. They specialize in restructuring. They were recommended to me. By whom? A private advisor. Name? I don't remember. The investigator didn't react. He simply made a note. I see. Richard folded his hands. Ethan, I strongly recommend you answer accurately. This meeting is being transcribed. Ethan leaned back. I have nothing to hide. Lawson clicked again. The screen changed. A corporate ownership chart appeared. Several arrows connected different shell companies. One finally stopped at a familiar name. Ethan Carter Family Holdings, LLC. Nobody spoke. The silence lasted almost 10 seconds. Then the CFO whispered, That's impossible. Lawson calmly answered. It isn't. The consulting company ultimately reports to this holding entity. He looked directly at Ethan. You approved payments to a company you secretly controlled. Daniel's face turned completely white. What? He stared at his younger brother. Tell me that's not true. Ethan looked away, only for a moment. That was enough. The board members exchanged quiet glances. Richard closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, he looked 10 years older. I defended you, he spoke softly. Every single complaint. I told people you were inexperienced, not dishonest. His voice cracked for the first time. I was wrong. Ethan finally lost his temper. You all act like I'm a criminal. I grew this company. I increased revenue. I doubled market value. Lawson nodded. Yes. You also approved over $40 million in payments to executives without independent review. He clicked again. Another spreadsheet. Executive bonuses, luxury travel, private aircraft expenses, home renovations categorized as operational improvements. The room erupted into whispers. One of the independent directors looked directly at Ethan. Did shareholders authorize this? No. Did compensation committee approve it? No. Then who did? Ethan slammed the table. I did. I'm the CEO. His voice echoed through the glass walls. Outside, employees had begun gathering in the hallway. Nobody could hear the conversation, but everyone could feel something extraordinary was happening. Lawson quietly closed the laptop. I believe that's sufficient for this morning. He looked toward Richard. We recommend immediate suspension of all executive financial authority. Richard nodded. So ordered. He signed the resolution without hesitation. The corporate secretary stamped it immediately. Effective. Now. An IT specialist walked toward Ethan. Sir, I'll need your company laptop. My access card. Corporate phone. Ethan laughed in disbelief. You've got to be kidding. I'm still CEO. Richard answered before anyone else could. No. You were CEO. As of 32 seconds ago. Your executive authority has been suspended. For the first time all morning, fear appeared in Ethan's eyes. Real fear. Not because of the board, not because of losing his office, because he had finally realized something. The investigation wasn't looking for mistakes. It was documenting crimes. And somewhere inside the building, another team was already searching every server he thought he'd erased. The conference room doors remained closed. Outside, the hallway had filled with employees pretending to walk past. Nobody believed the quarterly executive meeting was still about quarterly numbers. Not after compliance arrived. Not after the chairman showed up unexpectedly. And definitely not after 2 IT investigators wheeled locked evidence cases into the executive floor. Rumors spread faster than elevators. By lunchtime, half the building believed the company was about to be sold. The other half believed the FBI was coming. Both were wrong, at least for now. Inside the room, the atmosphere had changed completely. Nobody looked at Ethan anymore. Not because they hated him, because no one wanted to become associated with him. Corporate survival has its own instincts. People don't run toward collapsing buildings. They quietly step away. The IT investigator placed a silver evidence bag on the conference table. Mr. Carter, we've completed the first preservation process. He looked toward Lawson. The executive mailbox has been secured. The company cloud archive has been mirrored. The deletion history has also been recovered. Ethan frowned. Deletion history? I deleted plenty of junk emails. The investigator nodded. We know. Fortunately, deleted doesn't actually mean deleted. Lawson stood. Let's talk about yesterday evening. Ethan shrugged. What about it? You logged into the executive document server at 11:42 p.m. So? You remained connected for 37 minutes. I was working. You deleted 412 files. Silence. They were outdated. The investigator slid another report across the table. No. They were marked under legal preservation. They should never have been touched. Richard slowly removed his reading glasses. Ethan, did anyone tell you the investigation had already started? No. Then why were you deleting records? Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Daniel lowered his head into his hands. He finally understood. This wasn't panic. It was consciousness of guilt. Lawson pressed a button on the remote. The screen displayed a timeline. 11:42 p.m. Login. 11:47 p.m. Mass deletion request. 11:49 p.m. Automatic legal backup activated. 11:50 p.m. Cloud mirror completed. 11:51 p.m. Deletion failed. The room became eerily quiet. One board member whispered, "He tried to destroy evidence." Ethan pointed toward the screen. That proves nothing. It proves intent, Lawson replied calmly. The files still exist, so no evidence was destroyed. Correct. But attempting to destroy preserved corporate records is itself evidence. The chief legal officer finally spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan, did you know those documents were under litigation hold? Ethan didn't answer. He stared at the table. For the first time since becoming CEO, he looked uncertain. Lawson wasn't finished. We recovered another item. He nodded toward the forensic accountant. A new document appeared. An internal email. Sender, Ethan Carter. Recipient, personal Gmail account. Attachment, executivevendorarchive.zip. Timestamp, 1:13 a.m. The independent directors all looked up simultaneously. Outside counsel closed his eyes. Richard's expression hardened. You emailed confidential corporate files to your personal account? They were my files. No, Richard answered immediately. They belonged to the shareholders. Ethan suddenly stood. This meeting is over. I'm leaving. He reached for his phone. Before he could unlock it, Mark, the same security supervisor Ethan had ordered to remove me that morning, stepped quietly beside him. "Sir, I wouldn't advise that," Ethan glared. "Move." "I'm afraid I can't. You work for me." Mark remained perfectly still. "No, sir. I work for the company. And right now, the company is represented by the board." Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The balance of power had shifted completely. Just 4 hours earlier, Ethan had ordered security to escort me out. Now, the very same security officer was preventing the CEO from walking away. Power had a strange way of revealing who truly possessed it. Lawson gathered his folders. "We'll recess for 30 minutes. When we return, we'll begin reviewing executive compensation." He paused. "After that, we'll discuss the offshore accounts." Every head in the room turned toward Ethan. His face lost what little color remained. He hadn't expected them to know about those. And that single reaction told the investigators they were looking in exactly the right place. 30 minutes later, no one had left the executive floor. Word had spread throughout headquarters that something unprecedented was happening. Employees clustered around coffee stations. Phones buzzed with speculation. Managers canceled meetings. Nobody knew the details. Everyone knew history was being written. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere had become almost clinical. The lunch trays sat untouched. Lawson returned with another evidence binder, thicker than the first. He placed it in front of Richard. "This section concerns executive compensation." Richard nodded. "Proceed." A forensic accountant connected another laptop to the projector. "This report covers the past 11 months. A graph appeared. Executive salaries, performance bonuses, stock awards. Everything looked normal. Until one name appeared. Ethan Carter. Base salary, $1.2 million. Approved bonus, $4.8 million. Actual bonus paid, $11.6 million. The compensation committee chair frowned immediately. "That can't be correct." She flipped through her own records. "I approved 4.8. Not 11. The accountant zoomed in. The payroll system reflects 2 separate approvals. The first was committee authorized. The second, he paused, was entered manually using the CEO override. Every eye turned toward Ethan. Richard spoke quietly. "Did you authorize an additional $6.8 million to yourself?" Ethan folded his arms. "I earned it. That's not what I asked." Silence. "I asked whether you authorized it." "Yes." "Without committee approval?" "Yes." Nobody reacted dramatically. The silence itself was devastating. For 20 years, every executive in that room had followed the same compensation policy. No exceptions. Until Ethan. The accountant continued. "We also identified luxury expenditures classified as operational expenses." The next slide appeared. Private villa, Aspen, 7 nights, corporate retreat. Cost, $486,000. Another, Mediterranean yacht charter, leadership strategy meeting. Cost, $913,000. Another, interior renovation, Executive Innovation Center. The photo appeared on screen. It wasn't an innovation center. It was Ethan's home theater. The room erupted. "What? You're kidding. Is that his house? Even Daniel looked stunned. Lawson raised a hand. Please. One at a time. The forensic accountant clicked again. These expenses were approved through operations. Everyone instinctively looked toward me. I calmly shook my head. They never passed through operations. The accountant smiled faintly. Correct. They bypassed operations entirely. He displayed the approval chain. Finance, skipped. Operations, skipped. Legal, skipped. Direct CEO authorization. Richard slowly exhaled. He removed every safeguard. Ethan finally snapped. You all keep acting like procedures matter more than results. I doubled profits. I increased the stock price. I saved this company. Lawson answered without emotion. No. The market did. He displayed another chart. The company's revenue growth sat almost perfectly on top of the industry's average. You didn't outperform competitors. You simply benefited from the same economic cycle. Another click. Operating efficiency. Down. Employee retention. Down. Customer satisfaction. Down. Vendor disputes. Up. Compliance violations. Up. The room fell silent again. The illusion was collapsing. Then Lawson closed the presentation. I have one final question. He looked directly at Ethan. Why? Ethan frowned. What? You already had wealth. You already had power. You had the CEO title. So why risk everything? For the first time that day, Ethan didn't answer immediately. His shoulders lowered. His voice became almost defensive. Because everyone expected me to fail. Nobody interrupted. My father built this company. My brother was everyone's favorite. And Evelyn, he looked at me. Every board meeting, every executive dinner, all I ever heard was how brilliant Evelyn Carter was. His jaw tightened. I was tired of living in everyone else's shadow. The confession hung in the room, not an excuse, just the truth. Richard looked genuinely saddened. Ethan, no one asked you to become your father. No one asked you to become Evelyn. We only asked you to become a responsible leader. The silence that followed lasted nearly a full minute. Then one of the IT investigators entered quietly and handed Lawson a sealed envelope. Lawson read the first page. His expression changed. He looked toward Richard. We've completed the forensic review of the CEO's archived mailbox. Richard studied his face. Anything significant? Lawson looked back at Ethan. Yes. A witness we didn't know existed has decided to cooperate. Every executive in the room turned toward the door. Someone else was about to walk in. And based on Ethan's expression, he already knew exactly who it was. Everyone looked toward the conference room door. The silence was almost unbearable. Ethan didn't. He kept staring at the table, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck trembled. He already knew who was about to walk in. The door opened. A woman in her early 30s stepped inside, carrying a laptop and a thick binder. Several executives recognized her immediately. Melissa? The CFO frowned. Melissa Grant. Executive assistant to the CEO. She had worked beside Ethan every day since he took office, If anyone knew how his office operated, it was her. Lawson pulled out a chair. "Ms. Grant, thank you for coming." She sat down without looking at Ethan. Her hands shook slightly. "I'm here under legal counsel. I've signed a cooperation agreement with the board." The room fell silent again. Ethan finally spoke. "You've got to be kidding." Melissa slowly raised her eyes. "I begged you to stop." His expression hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Her voice cracked. "I warned you the contracts would be discovered." "I warned you not to bypass finance." "I warned you not to delete company files." "You told me that once you controlled the board, none of it would matter." The color drained from Ethan's face. Lawson nodded toward Melissa. "Please continue." She opened the binder. "For nearly 6 months, Mr. Carter instructed me to schedule unofficial meetings outside the company calendar. He ordered me to print contracts without document tracking. He also instructed me to destroy handwritten notes after several executive discussions." One independent director leaned forward. "Did you destroy them?" Melissa shook her head. "No, I couldn't." Instead, she reached into the binder and placed a small stack of yellow legal pads on the table. "I kept everything. Every meeting, every instruction, every handwritten correction Ethan had made himself. Dates, times, signatures, even personal notes scribbled in the margins." Lawson carefully slid the notebooks toward Richard. "This is why we asked Ms. Grant to cooperate. They confirm nearly every timeline we've reconstructed." Ethan stood so abruptly that his chair tipped backward. "You stole those!" Melissa looked at him for a long moment. "No, I preserved them. The company paid me to protect its records, not your secrets." Daniel finally rose from his seat. His voice was calm, but there was no hesitation left. "Ethan, is there anything she said that isn't true?" His younger brother didn't answer. Instead, he looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to defend him. No one did. Not a single executive. Not a single board member. Not even the attorneys he'd once ordered around. For the first time in his career, Ethan stood completely alone. Richard slowly closed the last notebook. "I've heard enough." He looked around the table. "As chairman, I'm calling for an emergency board vote. Before we continue the investigation, the board must decide whether Mr. Ethan Carter remains Chief Executive Officer." The corporate secretary quietly distributed voting cards. No one spoke. No one argued. One by one, the directors picked up their pens. Across the room, Ethan watched them in disbelief. Just that morning, he had thrown my employee badge into a trash can. Now, the people who had once applauded him were preparing to decide whether he would even have a job by the end of the day. As the first director lowered his pen onto the ballot, Ethan finally understood something no title could ever guarantee. Power could be given. Respect had to be earned. The corporate secretary collected the ballots in complete silence. No one spoke. No one even looked at Ethan. One by one, the votes were placed into a black leather folder and handed to Richard Holloway. He didn't rush. He opened the folder, reviewed each ballot carefully, then looked around the room. "For the record, the board has reached a unanimous decision." He paused. 9 votes. 0 opposed. A long breath escaped the room. As of this moment, Mr. Ethan Carter is removed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. No applause, no celebration, just silence. Because everyone understood this wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. Ethan stared at Richard as if he hadn't heard him correctly. You can't. I've given everything to this company. Richard's expression softened. No, Ethan. People gave everything to you. And you confused trust with ownership. Before Ethan could respond, another knock echoed through the conference room. This time, 2 men and a woman entered. Dark suits, official credentials hanging from their jackets. Lawson greeted them with a nod. They're here. Richard stood. Ladies and gentlemen, the board's internal investigation is now complete. The remaining matters will be handled by the appropriate authorities. The lead investigator stepped forward. Mr. Carter, we're here to serve you with formal notice regarding an investigation into alleged corporate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, obstruction of evidence preservation, and financial misconduct. He handed Ethan a sealed envelope. You are required to surrender your passport within 48 hours. You are also prohibited from accessing company systems or contacting employees involved in this investigation. For several seconds, Ethan didn't move. Then he laughed. Not loudly, not angrily, just bitterly. So that's it. Everyone disappears. He looked around the table. 20 years. And not one person stands beside me. Daniel slowly stood. There is one. Every head turned toward him. He walked toward his younger brother until they stood face to face. I'll stand beside you, as your brother. But I won't stand behind your lies. Tears gathered in Ethan's eyes. You chose her. Daniel shook his head. No. I chose the truth. Ethan finally looked at me. For the first time all day, there was no arrogance, no anger, only exhaustion. I hated you, he spoke quietly, because every room I entered, people trusted you more than me. I met his eyes. I never wanted your position. I only wanted this company to survive. He lowered his head. I know. It was the first honest thing he'd said all morning. As investigators escorted Ethan toward the door, he stopped beside the trash can near the conference table. My employee badge was still there, exactly where he'd thrown it hours earlier. He bent down slowly, picked it up, brushed away a few drops of coffee and pieces of paper. Without saying a word, he walked back to me and placed it gently into my hand. I'm sorry. Just 2 words. No excuses, no speeches. Then he turned around and walked out of the conference room. The doors closed behind him. No one followed. For the first time since sunrise, the room felt quiet. Not because the conflict was over, because the man who had created it was finally gone. The conference room remained silent long after Ethan disappeared down the hallway. No one knew what to say. Richard was the first to stand. He looked around the table, then rested both hands on the back of his chair. I've spent 38 years helping build this company. And today is the hardest day of my career. No one disagreed. This wasn't a victory. A family had been torn apart. A company had nearly destroyed itself from the inside. Richard turned toward me. "Evelyn, the board has one final matter." He slid a single document across the table. An appointment resolution. "We'd like you to serve as interim chief executive officer." Several directors nodded immediately. The vote wasn't even necessary. To them, the decision had already been made. One director smiled. "Frankly, we should have done this years ago." A few quiet laughs broke the tension. For the first time all day, the room felt human again. I looked down at the document. Then I gently pushed it back. No. Every head turned. Richard frowned. "You don't want it?" "I don't." "You've earned it." "I know." "So why refuse?" I smiled softly. "Because I've spent 22 years fixing problems after they happened. I'd rather spend the next chapter helping prevent them." The room fell silent once more. I love this company. But no company should ever depend on one person. Not a CEO, not a founder, and certainly not me. Richard studied me for several seconds. Then he smiled. The first genuine smile anyone had seen all day. "That's exactly why we wanted you." Daniel slowly walked over. He looked older than he had that morning. "I'm sorry." His voice was barely audible. "I should have spoken." "The moment he humiliated you." "I didn't. I was afraid of losing my brother." He lowered his head. "And I nearly lost my wife instead." I reached for his hand. "We both lost something today. But we don't have to lose tomorrow." For the first time that day, he smiled. Just a little. It was enough. 3 months later. The company released its annual report. A new governance policy had been adopted. Every executive contract required independent oversight. Major financial decisions now needed multiple approvals. Anonymous employee reporting became permanent. The reforms carried no individual's name. That was intentional. Good systems don't need monuments. They simply work. Ethan never returned to headquarters. The legal process took its course. Some charges were settled, others went to trial. People often asked me whether I hated him. The answer surprised them. I didn't. Hate is heavy, and I'd already carried enough weight for one lifetime. One quiet Friday afternoon, I walked past the same conference room where everything had begun. The trash can was gone. In its place stood a small wooden display case. Inside hung employee badge number 017. Mine. Beneath it was a simple plaque. It didn't mention my title, or the investigation, or the board. It read only, "Leadership is not measured by the power to humble others, but by the courage to protect them." I stood there for a moment, then smiled. Not because justice had won. Justice is never guaranteed. It must be defended. Every day. I turned off the conference room lights, closed the door behind me, and walked toward the future. This time, without looking back.